So, Tony, usually our cold opens entail something that was maybe thought of a couple hours beforehand. I've had a few options that I've been thinking of, trying to get something that was a little bit of a non sequitur towards the start of the episode. So I originally had this whole thing planned out that was going to have to do with filmmaking and kind of me working on something personally that I think has really bolstered forward my creative energy.
Yes.
Then something happened while I was at work yesterday.
Infinitely more interesting.
Interesting, I'm not sure is the correct word, but at the very least something more funny to me.
Who needs hope when you have the ha-has?
Who needs hope when you live in a small town and work at a minimum wage restaurant job and someone comes to the drive-thru window? You see, normally I get comments because I sometimes wear makeup, paint my nails and everything, and sometimes people see me out of work uniform and I got more of a scene attire going on. I get called some homophobic slurs sometimes, but this, I had a Wayne's World IRL moment. A man approached me, I should say approached the speaker box when I was had my little headset on at this restaurant I work at. And I hear a little ding, he starts driving off, and then I hear a ding again, which usually indicates that the guy has a trailer. Pulls up towards me and everything, and I see the trailer he has behind him has this large looking bookshelf on it, right? And everything, and I'm just sitting there to myself, well, you can't put books on that. It's got little hooks around it and everything. And I'm like, sir, what purpose does that shelf serve? I'm very curious. And he goes on this long diatribing story talking about how, like, I'm going to be purchasing my first gun within this year, so I figured I would buy myself a gun rack. But all I could think to myself was, sir, you don't even have a gun. Nonetheless, not enough to necessitate an entire rack. But I held that back because I'm strong-willed and smart. Welcome to the list.
It certainly does suck.
You've never seen it.
I've never seen it.
Oh my.
Burger. The burger is back, everybody. The best part of the segment. Burger.
Burger of film.
Burger is about 1/6 of the way done. Now, Colin, I want you to tell me, what part of the burger is this?
The part I hate the most. I hate tomatoes with my heart and my passion. And I like ketchup, I like tomatoes and salsa, I like tomatoes in a lot of stuff, but a good old raw tomato, not a fan, which is ironic because I have a big, dumb, stupid red face, so I was often called a tomato as a child.
So I figured, right, been punishing me a lot. I've been punished. It's about time that I inflict some punishment onto you. Now listen.
Are you gonna call old boy a punishment?
In some ways, it is physically challenging to get through. Listen, there's factors outside of this. I decided it's my turn. I'm finally going to subject you to some true horrors. I've mentioned this before. I've mentioned this anime before. Don't invoke the name. But you know what it is.
I'm not sure I do.
Oh, it's difficult to get into when the weeb of the group is like God. It's difficult to start. It's difficult to get through. Oh boy, are you in for something, right? Yes. So, Colin, unveil the horrors.
I don't know. You see, this is the fucked part. You can at least have somewhat of a guess with most of the stuff. I am so illiterate on all of this shit.
A few times.
Yeah.
I mentioned it more than enough.
If it's one thing that I think it may be, which I don't think it is because that's a show, I'm fairly certain.
It's movies too.
Okay, gotcha. Oh, you fucker. You got me. You got me. Sir, ironically, we talked about Mike Myers.
Wait, hold on. What?
We're watching Austin Powers, motherfucker.
Hold on a second. Hey, Jeff.
Oh.
Austin. We have Austin Powers in there? Well, let me check my notes real quick. Hold on a sec. Hold on a sec. Oh, okay, all right. So I'm getting news here, right?
Yes.
It says, oh, behave. Watch my movie instead. April Fools. It is the 14th. It's the 13th, I think.
So the joke in and of itself, you see, Austin Powers is much like the Joker. Chaos ensues,
It's not, that doesn't make sense. That's just bad and dumb.
much like this movie.
Austin Powers was written and produced by Mike Myers in 1997. Mike was known at this point basically for doing a lot of SNL sketches in the early 90s, and sketches the likes of which would become Wayne's World. I think they created the character on SNL, and then someone decided to make a whole movie about it. They made a sequel. After that, you know, doing SNL and doing Wayne's World, Mike Myers took about a 2-year hiatus until one day he was just listening to the radio, listening to the 60s music, and he said to himself, where have all the swingers gone? Where have the James Bond characters gone? He decided to create this character called Austin Powers for a band called Ming T. It's kind of like what the Gorillaz did way back in the day, where they create characters for a show or for a music thing, and they decided, you know, this character that we made for this song, it actually works really good, and maybe we should make a movie out of him. This movie co-stars Elizabeth Hurley, Seth Green, Michael York, and a few others I'm going to leave to be a surprise just for you.
I hope to God I haven't had them spoiled for me.
There's a couple I would never if I couldn't.
Oh, not you, just pop
Yeah.
culture.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. It's directed by Jay Roach. He apparently worked on a lot of music videos in the 1980s and the 1990s. And really, he has like almost no filmography before that, except for a small film called Zoo Radio. Ever heard of it?
No.
That's how you know it's small. How you know it's small is you can find it on YouTube, bootleg, re-upload with like 1,000 views from like 12 years ago. I think he directed the music video for the Austin Powers character, and that's where he got. He's like the husband to one of the girls that's in the band, and so things are all very tight knit. Very like close together. Aside from like all these actors, I think it's very close-knit group of people working on this movie. Soundtrack is great. It's a mix of like original compositions, including the song BBC by Ming T, as well as some classics from the 1960s, like Incense and Peppermints from Strawberry Alarm Clock, Soul Bossa Nova by Quincy Jones.
It's a bossa nova beat, you could say.
Fucking turn that up. I love that grooving. What kind of music is that? Like a bossa nova beat?
What's that, a Bossa Nova beat?
Nirvana, the band, the show fans, you.
And also, great movie, kind of dumb. Yeah. You'll see what I mean here in a minute.
I mean, I showed you Wayne's World recently. So
Oh yeah. So we'll see how it compares. Anyways, now do I have my? Let's see. What did he do with everything else? I don't like closer here, and it just says "Oh, behave," and then it's a picture of a butt.
This fucker.
Austin Powers, everybody.
International Man of Mystery.
In 1967, an international secret agent was cryogenically frozen in case the world ever required his services again. Now, evil is threatening the Earth, and the time has come to bring him back into the 90s.
Allow myself to introduce myself.
Danger Powers personal effects.
Actually, my name is Austin Powers. Danger's my middle name.
I'm gonna need you to sign these release forms.
Okay, name.
Sex? Yes, please.
In his time, he was the coolest secret agent alive. Unfortunately,
It's freedom, baby, yeah!
this is not his time. He's a swinger in a square world.
A lot's changed since 1967.
Bring on the sexy stews, man! Yeah!
We're called flight attendants now.
And he's a stranger in a strange land.
This is my mother, Mrs. Exposition.
Lovely.
Austin!
What have you done?
That's not your mother, it's a man, baby! Why won't this wig come off?
Ow! That really hurt. Who throws a shoe? Honestly.
Mike Myers.
Yeah, baby. Yeah.
Elizabeth Hurley.
Don't forget these.
Oh, thanks.
Austin Powers. International man of mystery.
Always wanting to have fun, Austin. That's you in a nutshell.
No, this is me in a nutshell. Help! I'm in a nutshell.
Colin. Now, we might have speed run through that intro. We might have steamrolled your chance to say, what's your history with this movie as far as before today?
So, Austin Powers, you see, I just want to say first off, this is a bit of a reversal of the usual situation. Austin Powers has this huge amount of like cultural osmosis. It's very big in pop culture and came out literally the year I was born, year after you were born, correct? It's 97?
Yeah.
So Austin Powers for me is one of those things that has always been there, but I have never actually watched. Now the reasoning for that is something Tony is aware of, but something I want to get across to you in the audience. I grew up very religious. My grandfather is a Baptist pastor, retired now obviously. But with that, anything vaguely sexual, not the PG-rated Christian norm unless it was an action movie because we live in America and violence is normalized, was viewed as this evil, awful thing that I wasn't allowed to watch. I loved Master of Disguise as a kid, but then my dad walked in years later after I'd watched it for a while and during the whole like little wiener, little nuts joke in that movie, I then wasn't allowed to watch it for years and years and years, and this would just be random. It's the standard of how my family lived with that. So Austin Powers was obviously a big no-go. If I couldn't fucking watch The Simpsons, why the fuck would I have been allowed?
And then spend the better part of your entire adult life with people saying, hey, Austin Powers is really good, you should come see it, or Austin Powers is absolute garbage, come see it with me.
That's the thing, I didn't hear much of that latter part. My whole expectation when going into this really did come down to, I'm sure this is going to be fine, especially in sort of my realizing I like a lot of Bush era comedy. Now, this does predate that a bit. I like a lot of Bush era comedy when it was being made. I love Adam McKay movies. When Adam McKay was making comedies and not trying to make political commentary. Fucking Vice bullshit, sorry. You haven't seen Vice. I have this weird association of my hatred of 90s filmmaking that I had back in high school. So I was going in with the mindset that this could possibly actually be really, really, really great. Because I watched The Matrix after calling that shit for years without actually having watched it in full. Because I watched Doug Walker videos in high school and I was an idiot.
As you do, as you do.
And The Matrix is like one of my favorite movies now. Because it's the fucking Matrix. I don't need to justify that The Matrix is good. So going into this, I had this kind of like, I don't know, I guess nervous mindset that, am I going to be made to look like a fool for opinions that I held for years, that this is the 90s, it's garbage? Or am I going to have the other horrible aspect pulled that up, which is high school me was correct, which I don't like that, because high school me was a fucking prick.
You don't like saying that, you know, your younger self is in any way, shape, or form right, because your younger self was very dumb.
I don't know, so then when we actually sort of get to like what my actual thoughts are for this, it ends up being a lot more complicated than I initially was anticipating. There's a lot about this movie that I think is on the verge of brilliance. And then there's a lot about this movie that's exactly what I thought it would be. And it's not the stuff you may think. I think this movie's biggest fundamental problem is that it's at war with itself. Is this a homage to 60s Hollywood, old spy movies, which I admittedly haven't seen much of, but I've discovered in the last year where I watched a lot more movies than I ever had before. I love the 60s. I think the 60s are super cool. As far as like Hollywood goes, there's a lot of problematic shit from around that era, but that's fine because it's old and it's dated. Problematic art isn't this inherent problem that we need to forget, and I don't think we need to like continuously watch all these bad movies, but for like acting like they don't exist, I think is like inherently a problem.
If you had that mindset, neither of us would have started Star Trek.
No.
And Star Trek is outstanding, of course.
Then I come to this movie, and I was very shocked by, I think, the opening 10 minutes, because I think that shit's brilliant. They're introducing stuff, and I've heard Austin Powers talk about specifically that opening scene before. He wanted to replicate Beatlemania, which, as someone who's not like a huge fan of the Beatles, that's just from ignorance to the Beatles, not because I don't like them. I'm just not educated on them. I'm still aware of the larger cultural osmosis of the Beatles. I've watched a couple of Beatle movies, which I don't know if you've seen any Beatle movies before. And just kind of capturing that whole idea of like what the Beatles were in the 60s. And it's like Austin Powers is this mash and fusion of James Bond and the Beatles, plus all this other secret agent shit that was just so popular from the era. And I thought that was brilliant and smart and fun and over the top. And then you transition into my favorite scene in the movie, which is the whole nightclub scene, because it is just such... It's relishing in one of my favorite eras of filmmaking. You have all these zoom lenses, which... The zoom lens was created in the 60s. Yeah. When you and I watched when you watched The Graduate for the first time and I was showing you The Graduate, I was talking about, like, pay attention to the way zooms are used here. It's specifically because the zoom lens was so new.
Yeah, people want to show it off and say, hey, look at this cool new thing that we've got.
Yeah, there's that POV shot of Dustin Hoffman turning around and looking through the fountain, and it zooms in through like the arm of the fountain to the girl right across from there. And you have the fun exploitation movie-esque snap in and out of that stuff, which comes through the rest of the movie and stuff like transitions, which once again, these are things I already knew about. And all that shit I really liked. When it was doing the satire element correct, and I know there's no correct element or way to do satire. It's all very subjective. But when it was doing that stuff correct, I found it really fun. The occasional fish out of water stuff, I really enjoyed. Austin Powers, watching history unfold on this VHS tape he was watching, I found that to be sincere and cool and fun.
Yeah, he sees the moon landing, and he sees the Berlin Wall coming down, and then there was one... very specific shot that made you cackle like a hyena. Yeah. That was the most important thing.
Yeah. Little jokes like, I didn't know Liberace was gay. That's fucking funny. Like, and that's like, just because it's very on the nose, but it works so fucking well. But then my problems with the movie. Let's get into those after we talk about what do you like about the movie, Tony?
Now, listen. The thing that I like about this movie is that it is dog shit. Now, I say that with all the affection that I could possibly say that with, right? This came out, right? And they said, listen, here's the joke, here's the bag. What if we brought a 1960s swinger into the 1990s, into the contemporary year of the 1990s, and they said, let's just commit to this, right? Even if something is a little dumb, even if something's a little stupid, we got to bring it with us. And if we're bringing Austin Powers back from the 1960s, we got to bring the gags with us. Yeah. There are quite a bit of visual, sexual jokes, quite a lot of them. I think this is like basically the origin for the early 2000s, like ha-ha wiener jokes, right? And they hammer into those throughout the whole film. They don't ever stop. And they just move forward with confidence of like, hey, some of these are not going to land, some of these are going to suck, but a lot of these are going to be very funny. And that's just the attitude that they have with the whole thing. When they commit to a joke, they're going to commit as far as they think that they can take it. And sometimes that's really awful, and other times it's the funniest fucking thing I've ever seen. Yeah. Will Ferrell's character is just one joke, and it ends abruptly. It is a wonderful, awful joke that they extend for about as far as they think they can extend it. And then they just take it one more step. And that's the thing you got to know about this movie is it's trying its best to not be taken seriously in a lot of ways. And in other ways, it's weird because there are bits and pieces that feel like very genuine, like they're trying to tell a very genuine story. They try to portray Austin Powers as kind of a bad guy for taking the 60s with him into the 90s. You know, there's a line specifically, "Welcome to the 90s. You're going to be a very lonely man."
That transitions into kind of like my problem with it, I guess. Which is, first off, I want to say, I don't have a problem with the absurdist elements as much as the direct, these are only funny because we find this kind of humor funny right now elements. Yeah. It's not the stuff of like, oh, it's the 90s, look how they dress, listen to this music. I don't give a fuck about that. Those are elements that are going to get dated no matter when you make a movie, no matter how hard you try. Those will sneak in during any kind of thing. The elements that I really kind of end up having a problem with as far as it goes is just like, I cannot stand the entirety of the like late 90s, early 2000s sense of humor of, I told the most obvious joke I possibly could. It's the most low-hanging fruit right there. Oh, what's that? It's not funny. Well, let me explain the joke to you. Isn't that funny? You know, writing exposition and writing a joke is actually very, very similar. If the audience didn't get your joke, that either means A, it was a bad joke, or B, they got it, maybe it just wasn't funny. If the joke is you explaining the joke,
it only is funny so many times.
Yeah. But they clearly thought it was funny. I don't think this is being done out of some sense of like, I think I'm smarter than you. It's just the time it was made. And as a result, there's just a lot of crickets going on during these extended scenes. And that's not something I really have as much of a problem with. That line you were saying in specific, though, "Welcome to the 90s," I think comes into a much bigger problem, which is it's been 30 years, close to 30 years since this movie came out. And a lot of my biggest problems with like what this movie is trying to do come down to the fact that as a society, we have progressed past certain things that go into this whole angle of problematic art I was talking about earlier. And this goes into a sort of angle where I don't feel like I can really sit there and support it in certain elements. Because it's not just like a quaint thing. The movie is trying to make like a very broad declaration of, this is what everyone believes now. And if you're not with this, get in or get out. Austin Powers, you know, is this braggadocious, psychedelic, left-leaning, free love motherfucker, right? And the movie is trying to lean into that a good percentage of the time. And then it takes a sharp, like, right turn towards the end of the movie where they're telling you directly into the camera everything that is satirical about this character that you know, you are supposed to be endearing to. Actually, you're a bad person for thinking that's, like, charming or anything like that. Then they look directly into the camera and then push this weird conservative angle on you that I just hated and I didn't like, to where it's like, unless you are specifically into monogamy, if you have casual sex, if you have multiple partners, you're a piece of shit. Austin, you're a piece of shit for sleeping with another woman who made it very clear to you earlier that she wasn't interested and only started making passes at you when she was intoxicated.
In that situation, I think Austin Powers kind of didn't do anything wrong.
I think she was being...
First off, the getting of the sex from Sex Killington or whatever her name is, the funny funny sex name here, Octopussy sex name here. That's part of his job. That's kind of what he was supposed to be doing.
And that's the gimmick of the character.
Yeah, and so when you tell people like, hey, kind of a fucking asshole for doing that, well, that's what he's supposed to be doing. Secondly, you never said specifically that we were together, but like 20 minutes of footage earlier, you were saying, I would never have sex with you, even if we were the last two people on Earth. And even after he, you know, refused to have sex with you while you were smashed and completely unable to consent. Mm-hmm. And then they try to swing it as like, yo, Austin Powers is actually a bad person.
And then by the end, you take our James Bond character and you make him in a monogamous marital situation, and you take all these things like his teeth are fucked up. Well, he got his teeth fixed. I'm like, that's kind of gross to me. I don't like that.
There's that last interaction with Dr. Evil and with Austin Powers where specifically, he says, listen, if I know what free love would have got us, I would have fucking done things differently, but the spirit would have still been there. And then Dr. Evil looks up and on the nose just says, nothing is more embarrassing than a dying hipster.
He says aging hipster, and I think like my big problem with that really comes down to it is he's basically calling Austin Powers a sellout, while the movie is trying its hardest to convince you, poorly I might add, that Austin Powers is not a sellout. Which, I don't know, that rubs me the wrong way. If you are going to make this movie that is about this braggadocious, sex-fueled motherfucker, just commit to the bit. I know Black Dynamite, I think, came out much later, but that movie commits to the bit. And if you want to make the story about maybe he's transforming into this, like, sort of sincere, more genuine person, then make the movie about that. Don't awkwardly ham-fist it in the last act. And then that comes into my other issue, which is Dr. Evil's kid. So close to being a cool character.
Yeah, Seth Green tried very hard.
It's just, like, it's not seeded early enough. Like, because they have the introduction scene, and then he's just gone from the movie for, like, this significant amount of time. Yeah. That then makes it to where his reintroduction then into the scene with Carrie Fisher, which, once again, these scenes in isolation are funny.
As SNL skits, these are all very, very funny, yes.
But as, like, a film, you know, as a story, what we're trying to do here, I don't think they work in isolation. And with that, I think this movie... I don't know how long the scripting process went. I have obviously not read the screenplay for this movie, which is a big pet peeve I have with a lot of critics being like, the screenplay for this movie is awful. And it's like, you can't say that. You haven't read the script. It could just be an execution issue with the way the movie was made. But then, like, I would say, like, the biggest problem I think I really do have with this is, like, I would like to read the screenplay. I would like to see what was improv, what wasn't, what was dragged out for the sake of them improvising on set. And it's like, oh, we can't delete this. I think the biggest thing this movie probably needs, and it being a comedy movie, I'm sure they would probably be like, oh, you're taking it too seriously. Well, no, it's a movie. It's a story. You put arcs in here, and you very clearly have these serious moments. Do another draft. Maybe 2. Who fucking knows? I think what is, like, primarily missing from this is, like, sort of, like, 5 or 6 scenes that I think could have made this go. And it's not a thing of like, oh, well, you just want the movie to be longer. I was happy when I was like, oh, 89 minutes. I like me a short movie. That's not saying I don't like long movies ever, but I like me a nice, lean 90-minute film. But then I think my problem then really starts to come in at, okay, well, you know, I want to add these scenes on, then what do? You trim the fat of that improv that goes on for maybe a little too long. If you want your movie to have these genuine moments and you want it to have these absurdist comedy moments, those two can coexist.
You got to find a line, a narrative line, and stick to it and say, we start here and we end here and we got to somehow string this together.
Yeah. And I also just think the thematic crux in the movie is just broken. Like, by the end, I don't think Austin Powers is the kind of guy to be like, oh, well, fuck free love. You know, I want to marry this chick. It just, like, contradicts his character for the rest of the movie. And low-key feels like you're, like, making your audience feel bad for doing so, which inherently, to me, is a problem. And I don't know. I just, it's not my jam. But then the stuff I really like about it, like I said, when it's emulating that 60s filmmaking style, when it goes from a flat comedic shot to instead a flat older film shot, which there is a distinction between those. Flat comedic shots tend to be these large group shots that are just there to capture the actors doing silly shit, while a flat shot from the 60s that isn't poorly shot, it's just flat, you can see the lines of the set when they're trying to emulate old school filmmaking. Like I said, that whole nightclub scene, the scene where he's trying to get intel and, like, sleep with the other agent, like at the Octopussy. A little just, I find this stuff to be the funniest. Like, I wasn't laughing out loud too much, but I like gag-based stuff, and it makes me chuckle.
How did you enjoy the bathroom scene?
See, that was ruined by a punchline. Yeah. I once again, I don't have a problem with, like, shit jokes or fart jokes. Wow. That is just a base level, dumb, funny thing that I'm not sitting here being like, that is the worst thing ever. I'm too above that. Where I came to the problem is the final shot of the guy being like, "Oh, what did you eat?" Because then I'm like, there's that 90s humor.
You gotta have the last little word. Gotta have it.
And you could have cut it off is the fucks part. But then, I don't know, because it's like a lot of the stuff that I feel like a lot of people would generally label as 90s humor. The fart jokes, the sex jokes. And I'm like, well, but no, Mel Brooks. You go back to the 60s and 70s, which is very clearly what Mike Myers is inspired by. You know, I showed you Blazing Saddles, right? You know, that movie has plenty of fart jokes. That movie had a scene that, like, after all the racial slurs in that movie, all the really fucked shit, the thing that the studio wanted them to cut was the cowboys sitting around the campfire eating beans, ripping ass. Because that was considered indecent. It's dumb, but it gets the idea across, and fart jokes in comedies are one of the most, like, universal things to get across because everyone farts no matter what language you speak. I have a very complicated stuff because I like the filmmaking stuff with this movie. I think the little bit we get of, like, a sort of final battle climax where, like, Austin is sneaking in and, you know, boarding the drill phallic-looking missile. Yeah. That's fun because it's shot like a 60s movie. Like I said, a lot of flat cinematography, snap zoom shots and everything, and people doing, like, fucking shitty, like, squibs and everything. I love that shit. That's fun. But then Austin making a, like, joke about, like, the guy trying to get ahead, and then he does 5 more jokes. And the joke is supposed to be that it's not funny, but then the joke comes from the actress being like, okay, let's go. Those punchlines don't land because they feel like parodies of other jokes.
They feel like parodies of the thing that they're parodying.
And at that point, I'm like, okay, you're being smug at this point. And I don't.
The main problem with the movie, and the main thing is just, it's a bunch of SNL skits with, like, kind of a theme or kind of an idea behind it that is just very muddled. And the main thing is just you're here for the SNL skits. Yeah. And I think that they could have done the SNL skits and just tied it a little closer together, a little tighter.
Like I said, another draft.
You might really like this scene. You might really like the scene where he scoots back in his chair and it scoots a million miles back.
That's not, those scenes aren't my problem. Like, that's it, because that's just a dumb little fun visual gag.
But as you know, you can always just take that and show it to people later on. You know, you can always cut that and then make room for this other more important scene that you need to keep the theme going and to keep the movie moving forward, you know.
I don't know. It's like, to me, the humor derives so much from the 60s stuff they're doing. I can feel Mike Myers' general love for cinema. Like, it's one of those things where I'm like, I don't think it's an ego thing as much as, like, your need for stupid jokes are getting in the way of you making something I think legitimately cool. And not cool in the sense of, like, oh, well, he's got to be badass. Cool in the sense of, like, this could be a love letter, you know. We watched John Wick 4 recently. I'd already watched it once when I went visit family over in Texas. I watched it by myself. I watched it with him. John Wick 4, if you haven't watched it and you're a John Wick fan, it's this big love letter to cinema. And I think this movie had an opportunity to be more so that and come off as more genuine just from making something that wasn't ripping off other stuff, but just kind of showing I love this thing legitimately. This thing means the world to me.
Take all the stuff that they were trying to do in the 1960s and do it with the new technology, with the new, like, methods and like better represent what maybe they were trying to do with what limited technology they had back then, or with.
I think that's a part of the charm, though. Yeah. Like doing a send off to that. I don't know if like I would have dug if the whole movie was in the 60s.
Oh, you would have liked it if it was in the 60s, all 100% in the 60s. Well, not quite the same, but if we ever do, if this nightmare ever appears again, if this gag ever shows up in our life once again, you might like Austin Powers 2.
You don't remember the subtitle, do you?
No, I don't. What the fuck is it?
It's not around
it's the
He fucked up. I'm keeping that in.
Austin Powers 2, The Man Who Shagged Me.
It's The Spy Who Shagged Me. The Man Who Shagged Me would make him gay, and this is the 90s. He's not gay.
Relax.
Relax. In closing, I don't know. I hate numerical scores because I watch everything I watch is put on Letterboxd. I put it there anyways. give it a 3 out of 5. I really enjoyed it. Now that's a lower score than Belle, which I think I enjoyed significantly less than this. But that's just an emotional thing, because the stuff I liked, which wasn't as much, like, has higher highs, and the stuff I didn't like really just
Lower lows, higher peaks, lower valleys.
So, Tony, in these final moments of the video, did this movie make you horny, baby?
I mean, yeah, chef.
Chef! And once again, cut it, chef.
Don't cut any, don't leave in anything else.
Yes.
Right?
Cut at chef.
Don't leave in the things we say.
No, nothing like that. And the alarm is going to go off in 3, 2, 1. Chef!